Under the shadow of the thorn ironwood tree, Mu Chen's palm slammed heavily onto the back of the man's head, who had been grabbed by the throat, directly knocking him unconscious. He then lightly clapped his hands and gazed toward the depths ahead. Earlier, he had gathered a lot of information from the man's mouth, and from what he learned, it seemed that Mo, Qin Feng, and the others had headed straight to this place after entering the Wood God Temple ruins. Clearly, they were highly targeted in their approach, and they had made extensive preparations, deploying dozens of teams. The total number of people involved must have been close to 200. What was most concerning was that these individuals were quite unusual. While their spiritual power cultivation might not be exceptional, without exception, all of them had trained, to some degree, in the body-forging divine art. This meant that their physical bodies were stronger than those of ordinary experts. If they were outside, Mu Chen wouldn't be worried, even if they had the numerical advantage. However, in such a special environment, it became a tricky issue. If the information we received is correct, Mo, Qin Feng, and the others should have reached the Spirit Treasury Hall by now. We're a bit late, but the good news is that there's a seal outside the hall. They will need quite a bit of time to break it. Mu Chen looked at Luoli and Wen Qingxian and said, their numbers are almost 200, and they've blocked all paths to the Spirit Treasury Hall. If we proceed any further, we may run into them, and things could get troublesome. So, should we continue forward? Luoli and Wen Qingxian exchanged glances, then nodded slightly. Then let's go. Mu Chen smiled. He wasn't surprised by their decision. With Wen Qingxuan's pride, there was no way she would retreat, and although Luoli appeared calm, her pride was no less than Wen Qingxuan's. Mu Chen turned and, with a light step, his figure glided through the shadows, once again darting ahead. Luoli and Wen Qingxian quickly followed. As they left, the area became silent once again. After a moment, a faint glow appeared inside the unconscious man's clothes, followed by a subtle buzzing sound. The glow flashed once and then vanished. At the same time, in the central area of the thorn ironwood forest, this was an open space surrounded by towering thorn ironwood trees, with a vast stone hall at the center. The hall was tightly sealed, and surrounding it were complex, obscure light runes that flickered with a faint glow, resembling a cage that enclosed the hall. Outside the stone hall, a dozen figures stood, including Mo, Qin Feng, and Lu Xiong, the leaders of the Alliance of Academies. Mo stood at the front, holding a glowing compass. Rays of light shot out from it, striking the gray light runes around the stone hall. The runes began to slowly dissolve, like snow meeting lava. At this rate, the seal should be completely dissolved in half an hour, Qin Feng said with a smile as he observed the dissolving seal. But just as he finished speaking, his expression shifted, and with a flick of his hand, a faint light shot through the forest and landed in his palm. It was a strange, jet-black insect, no larger than a fingernail, but its body shimmered like a mirror. Qin Feng frowned as he examined the insect. He then tapped his finger lightly, and the back of the insect, like a mirror, glowed. In front of him, a scene appeared. 3 figures were visible, Mu Chen, Luoli, and Wen Qingxian. Heh, what a coincidence, Qin Feng smirked, looking at the images of Mu Chen and the others. It seems these 3 are quite daring. Knowing the terrain here is special, and that our alliance has the numerical advantage, they still dare to come. At this moment, Mo also furrowed his brows and glanced at the image. Coldly, he said, I still need half an hour. Don't worry, they won't get through, Qin Feng said with a smile, his eyes flashing coldly. Leave it to me. I'll teach them a lesson. Heh, it's really interesting. If I encountered them outside, I wouldn't dare do anything, but heaven is helping me. With his words trailing off, he turned and walked away, waving his hand. Dozens of figures streaked out from the forest, closely following him before swiftly disappearing into the shadows. Looking at Qin Feng, it seemed he had come alone, not bringing anyone else. Judging by his demeanor, it appeared he didn't consider Mu Chen and his companions a threat at all. Is he really going to handle this alone? Lu Xiong asked Mo, watching Qin Feng depart. Mo smiled faintly. Outside, Qin Feng would have a hard time dealing with even one of them, but here, the outcome will probably be very different. Let him handle it. You still need to watch over things for me. I can't divide my attention. Understood. Lu Xiong nodded in agreement. Mou glanced at the distant shadows, a cold smile forming on his lips. Mu Chen and his group would likely be in for quite a shock. This surprise would make them realize just how foolish it was to barge in here recklessly. In the shadow-filled forest, 3 figures moved swiftly through the darkness. Mu Chen's pace suddenly came to a halt. He looked ahead, sensing no less than 30 auras in that direction. Clearly, this was the main path leading to the Spirit Treasury Hall, and the defense here was tight, the Alliance of Academies' vigilance severe. We can't sneak through. We'll have to fight, Mu Chen said, scanning the area and shrugging his shoulders in resignation. Due to the terrain, it was nearly impossible for them to slip by unnoticed. Right? Luoli and Wen Qingxian both nodded in agreement. Seeing their response, Mu Chen didn't say more. He bent slightly, his muscles tensing as he prepared like a predator about to pounce. On the main road ahead, dozens of figures had spread out, their alert eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Their builds were tall and robust, their bodies radiating a faint natural glow, an unmistakable sign of having practiced the body-forging divine art. At the front of the group stood a towering man, his build like an iron pillar, his gaze sweeping over the surroundings like that of a fierce tiger. He was clearly the leader of these men. Suddenly, the towering man's eyes sharpened. He had felt the ground tremble slightly, and the next moment, he jerked his head up, locking onto a direction. There, the sound of wind breaking the air rang out, and a figure shot out of the shadows like an arrow. Someone's intruding. Stop them! The towering man shouted, stamping his foot on the ground. The earth cracked with deep fissures as his body leaped into the air, an overwhelming sense of power emanating from him. Boom! His body collided head-on with the approaching figure. He was supremely confident in his physical strength, believing that even among the top experts of the Alliance, only a few of the leaders could surpass him in raw power. Bang! But this time, his assumption was wrong. His massive body collided with the shadowy figure, and in that instant, his expression changed drastically. The seemingly frail figure felt like a fierce spirit beast powered by overwhelming strength, the terrifying force crashing into him. A deep sound echoed as the towering man was sent flying backward, dragging a long scar along the ground before spitting out a mouthful of blood. Behind him, the other members of the Alliance of Academies froze, their faces changing in shock. They were all too aware of the man's physical prowess, yet how could he have been injured with a single collision? In their astonishment, the shadowy figure steadied itself, revealing Mu Chen's slender form. He glanced at the towering man, his body strong, but unfortunately for him, he had encountered Mu Chen. Too tough. All of you, attack together. The towering man shouted urgently, realizing that the young man before him had refined his body to a terrifying degree. Whoosh! At his command, the dozen or so figures immediately responded, closing in on Mu Chen from all sides. Seeing the incoming surge, Mu Chen's eyes turned cold. He took a deep breath, and faint black lightning began to flicker across his skin. His muscles tensed, and a low thunderous sound quietly spread through the air. He stomped heavily on the ground with his foot, and his body immediately shot forward, charging into the crowd. His fists howled through the air, with the power of his strikes like thunder, causing explosions in the air as each punch landed. Anyone who was struck by his fist's wind was forced to vomit blood and retreat. Behind him, Luoli and Wen Qingxian also charged out. Although their physiques were not as strong as Mu Chen's, they were still far superior to ordinary experts. Additionally, Luoli held the Luo God Sword. Even though spiritual energy couldn't be used here, the sharpness of the sword itself was far beyond what these people's bodies could withstand. Thus, as the three of them attacked, it was like a tiger entering a wolf pack. Despite the sheer number of enemies, they were pushed back step by step, with screams of pain echoing through the air. In just a matter of minutes, dozens of powerful figures from the Alliance of Academies were completely defeated, each of them lying on the ground, writhing in agony. Not being able to use spiritual energy is really a hassle. Wen Qingxian gritted her silver teeth. If this were outside, these guys wouldn't have even gotten close before she would have struck them dead with a single palm. Mu Chen smiled, just about to speak, when his expression suddenly grew cold. His gaze sharpened, and he looked up toward the shadows not far ahead, where dozens of figures slowly emerged, surrounding the area and nearly 100 people in total. At the front of these people, Qin Feng walked out with a smile, his gaze directed at Mu Chen with a playful, mocking expression, as if he were a cat toying with a mouse. In the shadowed forest, figures poured out like locusts from the darkness. Their fierce gazes immediately locked onto the three figures ahead. Mu Chen frowned slightly as he saw the array in front of him. He hadn't expected Qin Feng and his group to discover them so quickly. Luo Li and Wen Qingxian moved closer to Mu Chen, their eyes cold as they stared at Qin Feng. Though their enemies were numerous, it seemed far from simple to take them down. Mu Chen, you really are someone who refuses to follow the path when it's right in front of you, yet chooses to barge into the underworld, Qin Feng said with a mocking smile. You overestimate yourself, Mu Chen replied with a smile, glancing at the dense crowd around him. What's this? Do you think you have the upper hand just because we can't use spiritual energy here? Still acting tough? Qin Feng frowned. Don't you think you should show some concern by now? Mu Chen thought seriously for a moment, and then said, You don't have the qualifications to make me worry. Qin Feng let out a dry laugh, then slightly nodded. With a wave of his hand, his voice turned cold as he said, Take them out. Boom. As soon as his words fell, nearly 100 figures around them shouted in unison. Their bodies radiated a faint light, with skin gleaming like metal, exuding an overwhelming sense of strength. With a heavy stomp, they shot forward. The sheer momentum created by their numbers felt like the charge of 1,000 galloping horses, bringing immense pressure. Mu Chen's eyes turned icy at this moment. He took a deep breath, and black thunder flashed around his body. Then, he stomped the ground hard, and cracks rapidly spread from under his feet. Even though Mu Chen couldn't use spiritual energy right now, the strength of his physical body was far beyond what ordinary people could withstand. Whoosh! His figure turned into a blurry shadow as he shot out, crashing into the oncoming crowd. Boom! Mu Chen's punch slammed forward, the overwhelming punch wind tearing through the air like a cannonball, striking several figures in the front. The dull thud of impact sounded as their chests caved in, blood spurted out, and they were sent flying, instantly losing all combat ability. Boom! Boom! Mu Chen's expression remained indifferent as his fists and legs whistled through the air, black thunder wrapping around him. Each punch he threw carried terrifying power, and every strike sent enemies flying, spitting blood. At that moment, he was like a fierce tiger covered in iron, unstoppable wherever he went. Although the number of enemies surrounding Mu Chen was great, none of them could even get within a few feet of him. Not far behind them, Luo Li and Wen Qingxian were also surrounded by a surge of light. Their skin seemed to become even more translucent, appearing as smooth and flawless as jade. Luo Li wielded the Luo God Sword. Although she could not channel spiritual energy, the sharpness of the sword alone was enough to keep anyone within a few yards of her at bay. Wen Qingxian, too, held the Golden War spear firmly in her hands. The spear flashed with dazzling light, carving vicious and precise arcs. Anyone daring to approach her would find themselves ruthlessly pierced by a series of bloodied holes. In the shadowed forest, anguished screams echoed continuously, the bone-crushing sounds sending shivers down one's spine. Standing outside the battle circle, Qin Feng watched the three facing off against over 100 attackers, yet showing no signs of faltering. His gaze remained indifferent, as though he didn't care that his forces were being swiftly overwhelmed by Mu Chen and his companions. Impressive, he muttered, having observed the fight for some time. Finally, a faint smile appeared on his face, but his eyes didn't turn to the invincible Mu Chen. Instead, they lingered on Wen Qingxian, a fiery gleam passing through his gaze. If I defeat the former top scorer, perhaps my name will echo throughout the entire Spiritual Academy tournament. Among the three, if there was one person Qin Feng feared, it was undoubtedly Wen Qingxian. Not long ago, The team she led had firmly held the top position, with no other equally monstrous teams able to surpass them, no matter how hard they tried. Everyone knew that when Qing Xian possessed terrifying strength, if they were outside, Qin Feng wouldn't dare challenge her. But here, in this area where spiritual energy couldn't be used, her power had been restricted by 90%. This was perhaps the weakest moment of her life. The thought of defeating the former number one made the heat in Qin Feng's eyes grow even more intense. He took a slow step forward, then with a flick of his toes, his figure shot forward like a great rock, passing through the throng of people and appearing directly above Wen Qingxian. With a mighty sweep of his hand, a gust of wind surged with the force of a thunderstrike. Humph! Seeing this, Wen Qingxian snorted coldly. With a flick of her jade hand, the golden war spear sliced through the air like lightning, aiming straight for Qin Feng. Heh! Qin Feng chuckled. At the same moment, his fingers curled into a point, and an overwhelming surge of spiritual energy exploded around him like a tidal wave. Qin Feng was using spiritual energy here. When Qingshuan's fair face changed dramatically. Clang! The sound of metal clashing rang out as Qin Feng's pointed fingers, infused with immense spiritual power, deflected Wen Qingshuan's spear. The sheer force of the strike sent her stumbling back more than 10 steps. A faint pallor appeared on her beautiful face. Haha, now you know where my confidence comes from, don't you? Here, I can use my spiritual energy, and to me, you're nothing. Qin Feng laughed loudly, standing suspended in the air. A powerful aura of spiritual energy swirling around him, pressing down like an oppressive storm. When Qing Xian gritted her teeth, her face icy with frost. She had been injured by Qin Feng, something she, as proud as she was, could not tolerate. Even without spiritual energy, you are still nothing in my eyes, she sneered, her voice full of contempt. Is that so? Qin Feng's eyes flashed with cold light. In the blink of an eye, his figure vanished. When Qing Xian bit down on her silver teeth and retreated swiftly, she gripped the long spear tightly in her hand, and in the next instant, the spear danced through the air like a flash of lightning, striking out in all directions like a torrential downpour. Clang! 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 The sounds of metal ringing filled the air. Sparks flew as each clash shattered the air, and with each strike, Wen Qingshuan's delicate form shuddered slightly. Her pride had always been in her spiritual cultivation, and now that her spiritual energy was restricted, her strength had dropped to a dangerously low level. At this moment, she was completely suppressed by Qin Feng. Watching Wen Qingxian continue to retreat, Qin Feng's fiery determination only grew stronger. Laughing wildly, his attacks grew more brutal and unrelenting. The gust of wind carrying immense spiritual energy from Qin Feng's fingers once again contained the power to crush mountains. The force heavily struck the tip of his spear, and as the energy surged, when Qingshuan's delicate body shook, her rosy lips seeming to become even more vivid. Ha ha! Qin Feng laughed wildly, offering no respite for Wen Qingxian. On his fingertips, the light grew brighter, and a whirlwind began to form around them. Hurricane Finger! He tapped his toes and appeared behind Wen Qingxian as fast as lightning, sending a gust of wind from his fingers toward her back without mercy. Wen Qingxian gritted her teeth, and a trace of coldness flashed across her phoenix eyes. Her jade-like hand swiftly formed a peculiar seal, but just as she was about to activate it, she suddenly felt her body tremble. It was as if a familiar figure appeared behind her, and a familiar scent reached her, Mu Chen. Mu Chen wrapped his arm around her slender waist and pulled her tightly into his embrace. The sudden change startled Wen Qingxian, and she instinctively raised her elbow, slamming it into Mu Chen's chest. A grunt of pain followed in her ear, and then, both of them were thrown back by a surge of powerful force. As they clumsily landed, Mu Chen adjusted his posture, his body hitting the ground heavily. When Qingxian fell onto him, unharmed. What are you doing? When Qingxian quickly pulled herself free from Mu Chen's arm, her voice full of anger. You hit too hard. Mu Chen rubbed his chest and let out a bitter laugh. His gaze then turned to Qin Feng, who was surrounded by swirling spiritual energy his eyes growing cold. He murmured, "Let me handle him. I can take care of it myself." When Xingxian glared at Mu Chen in annoyance, clearly still upset that he had dared to pull her into his arms, Mu Chen ignored her, extending his arm to block her and stepping forward. Seeing that Mu Chen wasn't responding to her, when Qingxuan's brows furrowed, but when her gaze shifted to his back, she froze slightly. There was a large patch of blood on his back, clearly not his own. She glanced at Qin Feng, whose fingers were dripping blood. From his pale face, it was obvious that the blood wasn't his either. Mu Chen had embraced her because he had shielded her with his back. "You!" When Qingxuan's anger unconsciously softened, she looked at the blood on Mu Chen's back, her lips parted slightly. "Don't worry, I'm tough. A little hit won't hurt me." Mu Chen noticed she had seen the wound on his back, but simply waved it off. "Leave him to me. You go help Luoli." When Qingxian looked at the calm, handsome face of the young man, yet she could feel the murderous intent and fury bubbling beneath that calm. She bit her lip and, surprisingly, nodded obediently. Qin Feng smiled at Mu Chen, who was standing in front of Wen Qingxian, then raised his blood-stained finger, wiping off the blood. A hero saving a beauty? Such a cliché. After the hero saves the beauty, he has to take care of the villain. That's how you complete the story. Mu Chen smiled back. "You?" Qin Feng sneered. He clenched his palm, and overwhelming spiritual energy howled around him like a storm. Such power might not seem that impressive outside, but in this sealed place, it was enough to demonstrate his extraordinary strength. Mu Chen's gaze narrowed as he stared at the torrent of energy around Qin Feng. No wonder Qin Feng dared to come here alone and try to block them. He had such a trump card. "You must have used some method to isolate the forbidden spirit array's interference with your inner spiritual energy, right?" Mu Chen said slowly. "But such a method doesn't completely block the interference, so your energy is still sealed to some extent and can't fully recover." "You have a sharp eye." Qin Feng smiled and nodded. "But with just this energy, it's enough to deal with you both." Mu Chen smiled faintly, but the light in his eyes was as cold as a blade. Qin Feng smiled, and immediately, the spiritual energy around him began to surge violently, as if a fierce wind was blowing. He stamped his foot forward, and the gale swept through, his figure appearing behind Mu Chen like a shadow. With fingers charged with the power of a hurricane, he struck swiftly, aiming directly at Mu Chen's back with lightning speed. SSHH. Black lightning surged from Mu Chen's body at that moment. He quickly turned, unleashing a punch that collided head-on with Qin Feng's strike. Boom! A deep sound echoed, and a powerful gust of wind exploded, cracking the ground beneath them. Mu Chen's body trembled violently, and he was forced back several steps. At the same time, Qin Feng staggered back a few steps as well. "No wonder you're so confident. It turns out your physical body is that strong." Qin Feng looked at Mu Chen in surprise. Previously, Mu Chen had taken his attack with sheer physical strength alone, while even when Qingxian, relying on the power of the battle spear, had fallen short. Clearly, Mu Chen's physical body was extraordinarily powerful. Although Qin Feng had also trained in the body-forging divine art, he knew that if it came down to physical strength alone, even he wouldn't be able to compare to Mu Chen. Unfortunately, even the body-forging divine art required spiritual energy to be fully effective. Therefore, Mu Chen's body could not be fully utilized yet, and could only rely on raw strength to counter him. Not bad as a target. Next, let me have some fun playing with you. A cruel glint flashed in Qin Feng's eyes, and the smile on his face twisted into something more sinister. Since Mu Chen could not summon spiritual energy, his strength and speed were now compromised. Once Qin Feng used his body technique, Mu Chen would be unable to touch him at all. In Qin Feng's eyes, Mu Chen was now just an immobile target. Whoosh! Qin Feng's sinister laugh rang out. With a tap of his toes, a whirlwind formed beneath him, and his body turned into a streak of light, moving like lightning, weaving around Mu Chen. Hoo-hoo! Qin Feng seemed to transform into a storm, surrounding Mu Chen. The gales tore through the ground, leaving deep, crisscrossing marks. Mu Chen stood still, his gaze following the winds. He could vaguely feel Qin Feng's presence, but knew that he could never catch up. This meant Qin Feng could attack him freely, while he had no way to retaliate. Whoosh! A spiral of spiritual energy, sharp as a blade, shot out from the storm, moving at lightning speed and grazing Mu Chen's back. His clothes tore, and a deep gash appeared, leaving a blood stain. Mu Chen's expression remained unchanged, though the slight twitch of his muscles betrayed the intense pain from the wound. "Ha!" Laughter filled the storm, Qin Feng's voice full of mockery and smug satisfaction. The opponent who had been so troublesome before now felt like a fish on his chopping block, helpless and at his mercy. This feeling was exquisite. Whoosh! Whoosh! Qin Feng launched an unrelenting barrage of attacks, spiritual energy whips slicing through Mu Chen's body. However, he seemed to relish the sensation, refraining from striking Mu Chen's vital spots. The lashes cut through Mu Chen's body, leaving him bloodied. Yet they didn't cause any serious injuries, only making him appear horribly wounded. Despite this, Mu Chen remained completely still. Not far away, Luoli and Wen Qingxian had already gathered together. Both women moved to fend off the crowd, preventing anyone from approaching. Upon hearing the commotion, their eyes turned toward the scene. Their expressions shifted drastically when they saw the storm around Mu Chen, blood dripping from his wounds, looking utterly miserable. Luo Li gripped her Luo God sword tightly, the veins on her pale hand visibly standing out. This bastard! When Qingxian gritted her teeth, her eyes blazing with fury. She gripped the battle spear and formed a peculiar seal with her jade hand. Coldly, she spoke, "I'll go kill him." Luo Li suddenly grabbed Wen Qingxuan's hand, stopping her. She shook her head slightly, her voice soft yet firm. "However, he cannot use his spiritual power and is no match for Qin Feng. We have miscalculated. Not only are they numerous, but more importantly, Qin Feng and the others have methods to channel their spiritual power here." When Qingxian said in a low voice, "As for Qin Feng, he is not qualified to defeat him, even without spiritual power." Luo Li slowly spoke, her gentle voice filled with confidence in Mu Chen. Although she felt immense pain seeing Mu Chen drenched in blood and wished she could strike Qin Feng down herself, it was clear that Mu Chen wouldn't want anyone to intervene at this moment. He was that proud of a person. Upon hearing Luo Li's confidence in Mu Chen, when Qingxian paused for a moment, she then looked at the tall, bloodied figure standing firm amidst the storm, as majestic and unshaken as a mountain. She lightly bit her red lips, then turned her head away. When Qingxian charged towards the alliance members, her delicate face filled with murderous intent. Her body radiated a crystal-like glow as her war spear slashed through the air, forcing the attackers to retreat in disarray. While Wen Qingxian vented her anger on the unlucky foes, Mu Chen's spiritual energy lashes continued to intensify, each one causing more blood to pour from his body. How boring. Fine, I won't waste any more time. Seeing Mu Chen offer almost no resistance, Qin Feng felt somewhat bored. He immediately let out a cold laugh, and the storm's intensity increased, signaling that he was preparing an attack that could severely injure Mu Chen. Whoosh! The storm grew even more violent, and in a sudden moment, the storm seemed to freeze. A figure wrapped in the hurricane like a ghost swiftly appeared behind Mu Chen. Immense spiritual power gathered in his palm, and without hesitation, he ruthlessly slammed it into Mu Chen's back. Boom! The air exploded with a loud sound. Qin Feng knew that Mu Chen could likely sense his attack, but what difference would it make? With just his physical body, Mu Chen wouldn't be able to defend against his speed in time. So, everything was over. A savage grin appeared on Qin Feng's face, but it lasted only a moment before it suddenly froze. He saw, on Mu Chen's bloodied body, a brilliant flash of black lightning. The violent thunder roared wildly. Qin Feng's vision blurred for a second. When he refocused, he found Mu Chen's impassive face right in front of him. Mu Chen raised his fist, with black lightning swirling around it like thick liquid. A terrifying force spread from it, making Qin Feng's pupils contract sharply. "You talk too much. But thanks to you, I had enough time to gather the power of the black divine thunder within my body." A smile finally appeared on Mu Chen's previously expressionless face, but it was filled with mockery. So, next. Mu Chen's fist surged forward with the speed of thunder, and before Chen Feng could react, it struck his palm with tremendous force. You're finished. Boom. A deep, thunderous sound echoed, and the ground where they stood collapsed. Mu Chen remained unmoved, while Chen Feng's overwhelming spiritual energy was instantly shattered. His arm twisted unnaturally, as though even his bones had been shattered by Mu Chen's punch. Boom. His body shot backward like a cannonball, finally crashing into the ground. He skidded for over 100 meters, leaving a deep mark on the earth before gradually coming to a stop. The once noisy forest fell into a deathly silence. The members of the Alliance, who had just moments ago been confident in their overwhelming advantage, now stared at Chen Feng, who resembled a dead dog, his face filled with disbelief and horror. Luo Li smiled softly. She looked at Wen Qingxian and said with a smile, I told you I was right, didn't I? When Qingxian glanced at the bloodied Mu Chen, she lightly pursed her red lips, intending to mock him as usual. But when she thought of the blood hole in his back from when he saved her earlier, the words died in her throat. The once chaotic forest grew silent, and the experts of the Alliance of Academies, who had previously worn fierce expressions, now looked horrified. Fear was evident in their eyes as they gazed at Mu Chen, some even retreating instinctively. Mu Chen paid them no attention. His gaze was fixed on a figure not far off, lying collapsed on the ground, blood dripping from their body. His expression remained indifferent. You, Chen Feng, blood-soaked and struggling, managed to get up. The fluctuations of spiritual energy around him were almost non-existent. Had it not been for his spiritual energy protecting him earlier, he might have been killed by Mu Chen's punch. Even now, his eyes were filled with fear. He trembled as he looked at Mu Chen, unable to comprehend the terrifying power that had suddenly erupted from him. How could he unleash such force? He wasn't even able to use spiritual energy. Mu Chen looked at Chen Feng and smiled faintly. Indeed, he could not use spiritual energy, because the power he had just unleashed came from the Black Divine Thunder. His body had undergone countless temperings from the Black Divine Thunder. Residual traces of its power still lingered within him. Normally, when his spiritual energy surged, the Black Divine Thunder's influence was hard to detect. But now, as his spiritual energy settled, he could sense the remnants deep within his flesh. While this power might not be exceptionally strong on its own, here and now, it was more than enough. However, gathering this power required time, which was why Mu Chen had allowed Chen Feng to attack him. His plan was to buy time. He knew that he only had one chance to strike, for Chen Feng's speed, thanks to his ability to use spiritual energy, was extraordinarily fast. Mu Chen, relying solely on his physical speed, could not keep up. Thus, Mu Chen needed not only to gather his power, but also to seize the moment and land a decisive blow. This all required foresight. From the beginning, Chen Feng had been part of Mu Chen's plan. Even when Chen Feng laughed triumphantly, he hadn't seen the cold smile lurking in Mu Chen's eyes. It seemed that, in the end, the one who would have the last laugh would not be Chen Feng. Can you still resist? Mu Chen asked Chen Feng with a gentle smile, then slowly began walking toward him. Chen Feng, seeing this, quickly backed away. But as he moved, his clothes were torn apart by the wind from Mu Chen's earlier punch. At the same time, something that emitted a faint glow fell from his chest. It appeared to be a jade plate, about the size of a palm, radiating a soft, eerie light. When Chen Feng saw the jade plate fall, his face changed dramatically. He quickly reached out and grabbed it. Bang! Mu Chen stomped his foot hard, his body shooting forward like a missile, his eyes filled with murderous intent. He charged at Chen Feng, as if he intended to kill him on the spot. Chen Feng, terrified by Mu Chen's fierce gaze, felt a chill run through his heart. His eyes flashed rapidly, and with a grimace, he withdrew his outstretched hand. Summoning the last remnants of his spiritual energy, he blurred into a shadow and hastily turned to flee. As Chen Feng ran, the experts of the Alliance of Academies, seeing his retreat, lost all will to fight and began to scatter in all directions. In less than a minute, the once chaotic forest had turned eerily quiet. Mu Chen didn't pursue Qin Feng. Instead, he bent down and picked up the jade plate that had fallen to the ground. He examined it closely, feeling an instinctive sense that Qin Feng's ability to use spiritual energy here might be connected to this object. Otherwise, Qin Feng wouldn't have looked so panicked. The jade plate was small, about the size of a palm, and smooth to the touch. However, within the plate, intricate lines of light spread across its surface, forming a complex pattern. A subtle, unusual energy radiated from it. What is this? Luoli and Wen Qingxian walked over, both curious as they looked at the jade plate in Mu Chen's hands. Mu Chen focused on the intricate patterns inside the jade plate. To an ordinary person, these lines of light might seem meaningless, but Mu Chen sensed something familiar within them. This jade plate contains a spirit array, Mu Chen murmured after pondering for a moment. Oh, Luoli and Wen Qingxian replied, realizing what it was. As Mu Chen held the jade plate, his expression suddenly changed. What happened? Luoli and Wen Qingxian asked in unison, noticing his reaction. Mu Chen's face looked strange and soon, his body trembled slightly. To the astonishment of Luoli and Wen Qingxian, a powerful surge of black and white spiritual energy erupted from within him. You can activate spiritual energy now? Mu Chen smiled lightly, his gaze fixed on the jade plate in his hand. So Qin Feng could activate spiritual energy because of the spirit array engraved on this jade plate. If I'm not mistaken, this spirit array should be able to block the interference of the forbidden spirit array on the body's spiritual energy. I wonder who engraved this array. It seems that within the alliance of academies, there must be some incredibly skilled spiritual array masters, Mu Chen murmured. But who could it be? Mou, Qin Feng, and Lu Xiong clearly didn't seem to be deeply versed in spiritual arrays. If that's the case, it must be the rarely seen Grand Leader of the Alliance of Academies. The Spiritual Academy Grand Competition truly hides talented individuals, Mu Chen sighed. You seem to be a spiritual array master too. Can you engrave such an array? Wen Qingxian asked. The feeling of being unable to use spiritual energy was unbearable for her. If she could fully activate her spiritual energy, she wouldn't have needed Mu Chen's help earlier. Mu Chen stared at the intricate light runes within the jade plate and smiled. This array is clever, but it's not of a very high level. As long as you know the array diagram, it's not too difficult to set up. Also, there are some flaws in this array. I think that's why Qin Feng couldn't completely block the forbidden spirit array from affecting him. Can you improve it? When Qingxian raised an eyebrow. It shouldn't be a problem, Mu Chen smiled. His smile carried a subtle confidence in his spiritual array talent. After all, his mother was a grandmaster-level figure, one of the top in the entire Great Thousand Worlds. As her son, it would be hard to excuse Mu Chen if he was mediocre in this field. Qin Feng really gave us a great gift. Without it, barging in would have been troublesome, Luoli smiled lightly. Before, none of them had expected Qin Feng's hidden trump card. Though even with this, if they fought, Qin Feng couldn't possibly defeat them, but they would still have to pay a price. Mu Chen nodded and sat down cross-legged while holding the jade plate. Give me some time. With those words, he focused all his mind on the jade plate. His eyes closed slightly as he sensed the complex light patterns, then reflected those tracks in his mind and quickly sketched out a clever and intricate array diagram. Luoli and Wen Qingxian sat down on the grass beside him. Luoli gazed at the young man with bloodstains still on his body, her beautiful eyelashes fluttering gently. Wen Qingxian, sitting beside her, watched Luoli. In her eyes, Luoli was undoubtedly more beautiful than Mu Chen. Although the latter had performed well earlier, it didn't change Luoli's position in her heart. Luoli. Suddenly, when Qingxian seemed to think of something, her expression shifting. Luoli turned her head and looked at Wen Qingxian. You're from the Luo God clan, right? Perhaps soon, you'll become the next queen of the Luo God clan, Wen Qingxian said softly, gazing at the exquisitely delicate face, like porcelain. Luoli gently nodded, staring blankly at Mu Chen, feeling a sense of longing. She didn't know what he would look like when they met again in the future. The situation of the Luo God clan doesn't seem too good, does it? When Qingxian sighed lightly, as if she knew something, Luo Li smiled and said, "It may be the weakest time in the history of the Luo God clan, but it's okay. I'll work hard." When Qingxian hesitated for a moment before speaking again, "Have you ever heard of the Western Battle Emperor from the Great Western Heaven Realm?" At that instant, Luo Li's body seemed to freeze slightly. She glanced at Wen Qingxian, nodded, and said, "Of course I've heard of him. The Western Battle Emperor, who could stand shoulder to shoulder with figures like the martial ancestor from the martial realm and the flame emperor from the boundless fire domain. How could I not have heard of him? I heard he once said he could protect your Luo God clan." When Qingxian lowered her voice. "But," Luo Li smiled faintly, "but he wants me to go to the Great Western Heaven Realm, right? My grandfather once mentioned this, but I told him that if a race needs to rely on others for protection just to survive, such humility isn't something we need. I'll do my best to change the fate of the Luo God clan. If my clan is truly destined to perish, I'll take those who wish to destroy it down with me. The Battle Emperor, though famous and intimidating, I have no interest in whatever he wants me to do in the Great Western Heaven Realm." When Qingxian looked at the gentle, beautiful smile on Luo Li's face and asked, "Why?" Luo Li gazed at the young man not far away, smiled faintly, and said softly, "Because someone once told me that one day, he will become a peerless powerhouse." When Qingxian also looked at Mu Chun, thinking to herself, "This guy really has big ambitions. This matter, please don't tell Mu Chun," Luo Li said. When Qingxian nodded, she understood that Luo Li didn't want to put too much pressure on Mu Chun. After all, the title of the Western Battle Emperor was truly formidable. He was a real big figure in the Great Thousand Worlds, someone whom even her own clan couldn't afford to underestimate. However, when it came to choosing between two positions with vastly different levels of power, Luo Li didn't hesitate to stand behind Mu Chun. The trust she had in him was truly enviable.